So, hello and welcome to this episode of the Lehigh Valley with Love podcast. We're talking today with Jason King-Jones, the artistic director for the PA Shakespeare Festival and host of Shakespearean Insights on WDIY, which helped me out with a lot of the questions for today. I didn't know that you hosted that, so you have a lot of episodes in there. So that's really interesting. I guess we'll get into that as we go a little bit. Sure. But first of all, thank you for coming on. Sorry I kept you waiting. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. No problem. Happy to be here.
So, Jason is the artistic director of the PA Shakespeare Festival. Could you give us an overview of what to expect from this year's festival at DeSales University?
Totally. I think the big overview is there's something for everyone, and hopefully a lot for a lot of people. This summer we are we're centering the whole theme of the season on Brave New Worlds, which is a quote that comes out of The Tempest, which is one of the big pieces that we're doing on our main stage that I'm going to be directing. But just for context, there's a scene in The Tempest when Miranda, who has been living on an island with her dad for pretty much all of the life that she can remember, suddenly encounters all these other people in this space, and she just says, "Oh, wonder how beauteous mankind is! Oh, brave new world to have such people in it." And it's just this moment of wonder of just seeing the beauty of humanity and understanding that people can be so different and that there's so much beauty in that. And I wanted to create a season that really embraced that idea. So there are, we have musicals. We have In the Heights, which is a fantastic musical that celebrates diversity and celebrates community. We're also doing another musical on the Schubert for the first time, Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill. We got a ton of Shakespeare that we're doing. We've got a community tour that's going out around the community. We're just trying to find, and we're also doing an outdoor performance of complete works of William Shakespeare, abridged, revised again, and that's all intended to have something for everyone. If you've been a part of the festival before, or you've tried it out, you've seen a couple of shows, you're going to see a lot of stuff that you recognize. But if you've never been here before, there's going to be a lot of reasons to attend.
Yeah, that was kind of my next question. Is Shakespeare is timeless, and a lot of us, more so you, but a lot of us have grown up on these works and we enjoy them. How do you keep it fresh? I mean, you kind of explained some of that. You have different of events going on. You have tours, like you had said. Is it a challenge every year to say, people have seen this play before? How do we continue to make it different, I guess?
Yeah. It's funny. I attended the season planning meeting before I started last year. And one of the things that they talked about was like, well, we've got to be careful if we do this, we've done this show, we got to it's got to stay on the shelf for a while before we bring it back, because we don't want audiences to get tired of this text. And I can understand that. I can appreciate that as a person who's like, I've seen this play. I know how it goes. That said, fortunately, there are like 37 or 38 of Shakespeare's plays, so there's a lot you can pull from. There's also a lot that Shakespeare inspired, a lot of work that was inspired by Shakespeare, or just the creativity of lots of writers of musical theater and contemporary plays that we are also kind of pulling from. We don't only do Shakespeare. But speaking of Shakespeare specifically, what I think is really fantastic about the plays is that they different plays talk to our current time in different ways at different times. Yeah. So you could, if you're doing a production of, say like Hamlet right now, it's going to speak to the world in a different way than it did even 10 years ago. So the plays talk to the present world in a different way. And when I talk to students about how to approach Shakespeare from a creative standpoint, what I encourage them to do is obviously read the play a lot, but then also just look around, examine the world, and however the play is talking to you in context with the world as you experience it. That's the production that you're going to be creating, you're going to be telling. And so there's always a way that these plays can talk to us and talk to the contemporary time. With The Tempest, for example, I'm going to be directing, and that's a play it's a love letter to the theater. It's a play that's about magic. Prospero is this magician, and there's this great, this metaphor about magic and making of theater that really kind of works together. So there's a lot of the play that is about the magic of making the impossible happen. And so that's kind of how we do it, and how we kind of make it relevant for an audience.
Is that does that go into the planning process? Like, because you have a diverse amount of Shakespeare plays. Are you thinking what is going to be maybe received well now, or how do you? I guess what I'm trying to ask is how do you pick the plays that you're running each year? What goes into that?
Yeah. Well, we're already in the planning process for next year, so I can just kind of say, just generally, like we're thinking about the season. I like to think about the season as a whole conversation, especially since our festival happens all over the summer. We're doing we're like a regional theater. We produce a season's worth of regional theater, content smashed into about 8 weeks, 8.5, 8 or 9 weeks, or 9, I guess, in this context. So it's just a lot that we do, and so I want to think about it like one larger conversation. Like, what kind of conversation do we want to have with our audience? So Brave New World being a kind of way to frame the whole season. We're looking at next year. We're thinking about how we can celebrate community, and what are the plays that kind of help us do that. And so we think about the comedies and the tragedies and the histories. We also, speaking of histories, one of the first things that's coming out of the gate this summer is Henry IV Part 2. The reason that we're doing Henry IV Part 2 right now is because we did Henry IV Part 1 in 2019. The festival was planning to do it in 2020. Of course, that didn't happen. So we want to pick that, right. We want to pick up that storyline, and then for our audiences, be able to kind of continue that thread. There are 2 plays after Henry IV Part 2 that we can do. One of them is Merry Wives of Windsor. One of them is Henry V. So there's a strong pull to do one of those plays very soon, and probably one in 24 and probably one in 25. And just kind of which one we do next is part of that conversation. Sure. So there are those kinds of like how we continue with those stories. We do have some plays that the festival has never produced. And so there's a pull to kind of say like, well, is there one on the shelf that we've just not done yet? And how do we do that? So we want it because we'd like to be able to, the phrase is to complete the canon, and we'd like to be able to complete the canon at some point. So those are things that are in the mix. And then of course there's the concerns, not the concerns, there's also the thoughts of like, well, we've been doing musicals. We love doing them. We have a history of doing them well. So what are the musicals that we're going to do that kind of help balance out the season? So these are kinds of the conversations that we have with our team here. And one of the things that I think we've got going on pretty well this summer is a great diversity of programming, stories from different artists about different cultures and histories and things like that. And I want to make sure that we continue to do that because I think that there's a lot of beauty to celebrate the diversity of the human experience. And I want to make sure that we give our audience the opportunity to see the world through a bunch of different lenses, not just the same story or the same kind of story over and over again. So all those factors kind of play into how we do it.
Sure. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit then, and I'll come back. But you just talked about all the diversity, and Shakespeare has been reimagined many different ways,
Sure.
throughout history. For this particular season, are there any, maybe, I don't want to say unconventional, but maybe unconventional interpretations or anything like that you're incorporating into this year's festival?
That's a great question. I mean, we're not setting the Tempest on Mars, if or anything like that. There it could be fun. It could be fun. Yeah, I will say that I was not originally going to be directing The Tempest. The Tempest was originally going to be directed by our associate artistic director, Dennis Razzie. And then Dennis has had some recent health issues that have made it kind of impossible for him to continue with the production. So I've taken the concept that he had and we've evolved it a little bit, but a lot of it is kind of speaks to where he was going with the piece. So I think that if I had been starting The Tempest solo, it might look like a different piece than what Dennis was doing. Although I will say that Dennis's production was a little bit more, I think, traditional on how it was set. It was set on an island, and the world echoed a little bit of the age of exploration that was kind of happening around the time of Shakespeare's writing. We have played with that a little bit more, and we've highlighted more of the theme of the magic of theater making in it, which has been and there are two key magical characters in The Tempest. There's Ariel, which is this fairy spirit, and Caliban, which is this kind of often kind of played as this kind of like subhuman creature. And is he part fish or lizard or something like that? You don't quite know. So once you kind of lock in what those characters are, you have a production. Your production kind of radiates from that because you have to answer those questions. Who are Ariel and Caliban in this world? And so I think in our world, they echo more a world that is tied to theatrical performance over the centuries, and less so about like creatures of an island and magical fairies. So I guess you could say that there is a little bit of a different kind of take on the play from that standpoint. Henry IV Part 2, just to kind of jump into that, what makes that piece also unique is that's what we call our extreme Shakespeare. The actors are arriving on Friday this week, and they have 4 days to rehearse. There's no director, there's no designers. They've come in with their lines already learned, and they kind of rehearsing it the way that a Shakespearean company, the way that we understand Shakespearean companies did at their time, with their lines already learned. They know what their roles are, and they kind of work together to tell the story. They know the basics of, well, this is what great stagecraft looks like because we're experienced actors, and then we're just going to tell the story. So in some ways, it kind of just obliterates the hierarchy that we're used to having in theater, where you have a director, you have designers. This is where you go. These are how you make these choices.
It seems a little more communal.
It's a lot more communal, a little bit more chaotic. But what also comes out of that is a really kind of pure and distilled kind of approach to the text that's also really visceral and exciting. So that's, I think, just a lot of fun and a great way to kind of just dive right into the season. Then the Midsummer Night's Dream that we're taking on the road, our young company, who are DeSales University students, they make up our young company. They're rehearsing this production of Midsummer that's going to go around the community, and that's just going to be a little bit more of a contemporary take. Midsummer Night's Dream is a classic, timeless comedy that's kind of meant for all ages to kind of experience the joy of creativity, and the foibles of love. So.
Well, let's talk about, you mentioned a bunch of people who are also involved in this. And there's so much that goes into this. You talked about the rehearsing, being out in the community. What are some of those, the key ingredients that the Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival has to consistently put on high quality shows every summer?
Yeah. I love talking about this as if I've been around a lot. I just started in September. So, but I think that's part of it is, as I've been learning, I think we have 4 values at the festival. Shakespeare obviously is one of them. Quality is one of them. Relationships is one of them, and that's, I think, what I would lean on here to answer. To answer this question on like what has made us so consistent over time, besides always leaning on making sure that we do the best quality work we can. The other answer is we have great relationships. We have artists who really enjoy working here, who want to come back. They have a great experience. So I spent a lot of time when I started this gig. Actually, before I started in September, I was already speaking to artists who had been working here because I originally was at the Olney Theater Center in Olney, Maryland. Before that, I worked in New York and New Jersey. I had like a 20+ year career before I came here. And the thing with the theater is it's actually a pretty small world. Everybody's interconnected in some way. And I knew like a half dozen plus people.
Or so-and-so from so-and-so.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was talking to directors, designers, actors who had worked here about like, what do you love about this place? And then when I got here, I met a lot of new people who have a long history here. Like, what is it that you love about the festival? Why do you want to work here? And so you continue those relationships, and then we start to foster and build new relationships. So we have a great collection this summer of people who have a familiarity and a history to the festival, and then a lot of people who are brand new to it. But we've bought into the idea that this is a really great summer collective retreat, a place to make a lot of really great work and then share it within the community.
Going into the community and your audiences, Shakespeare language can sometimes be challenging, especially if you're first coming into it. How do you approach making some of that more accessible? I know that you can't hold everybody's hand, but you want to also have people who maybe haven't experienced Shakespeare before also come in and not be intimidated. So how do you kind of go about that?
Absolutely. Well, there are a couple of different ways that we do that. For a piece like Midsummer that's going out into the community, and we want it to be something that can be accessible to, to all ages, for, families to bring their kids along and not have to get a babysitter. It's a free performance. Come sit down and watch the show. It's, first of all, the show's been edited. So it's about an hour. It's a little over an hour long. So any of the more confusing bits of language or context are just gone, and you just kind of pare it down to the action. And then you trust that a really great director like Matt Pfeiffer, who's directing it, is just going to keep the story super clear. So, like, this person loves this person, but can't marry that person because because the parent says no. You just, like, the storytelling gets really clear, and you distill that. You don't dumb it down, but you just make sure that the storytelling is clear. And Midsummer is a piece that once you pare down the text, the story can be pretty clear. The plot is, there's a lot going on.
Well, they're but like they're timeless types of stories that we've heard so many times, but these are maybe some of the originals,
Exactly.
As far back as we can go.
Yeah. And then for things like the histories for Henry IV Part 2, which like these, for the Brits who were coming to see this show, it was like their history, right? Like, imagine, like, we go to see a play that's about, Gettysburg, and we have a history. We know it. We've been studying. We know these things already. So, the audience was walking in with that. Our audiences don't have the benefit of that much British history unless you're just an Anglophile or a history major. So what we do is we actually have prologue talks that we give 45 minutes before the show for every Shakespeare play we do. Our director of education, Annalise Rodriguez, puts together a prologue, and we kind of go through, these are the key things that you kind of need to know in order to understand the story. Here are the key players. Here's the bit of history that these people are going to be talking about, so that you understand what it is. And, and even for the Tempest, here are the major themes, here are the major characters, so that when you see the show, you can appreciate it a little bit and not just have to spend all the time using your brain to figure out what exactly is going on.
Well, that makes so much sense too, because it's kind of like, hey, this is, we're going to ease you into it, but giving you this knowledge so that you can kind of follow along, from Jump Street there. That definitely would make me feel a little bit better. I mean, I know a lot of these plays, but some of them, when you're watching them, live and you're not reading the text, it can start to get.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we do have in the program, we also have a brief synopsis. So that, like, if you can't make the prologue, here's a brief synopsis if you want to read it. Like, I'm not a fan of like telling you what the story is going to be before you see it, but some people appreciate that. So we have it available if you want to read it. So,
well, and that goes into, you talked about education, your director of education. Can you talk a little bit about that component and why the education is so important regarding the Shakespeare during this time?
Absolutely. And by the way, education is our fourth of our 4 values, because it's really important to us, not just like helping to educate our audience, but also educating the next generation of theater makers. So here at the festival, we have the young company that I mentioned, which are early career actors and students in the DeSales University program. We also have interns in our scene shops and in our administrative staff, so that we can be training and teaching the next generation of theater makers, because that's how this business works. I was an intern when I started. My first thing was an internship at a Shakespeare festival. And
I imagine you learn a lot from those who came before you. It's a lot of
absolutely
passed down.
It's a lot of passing down that knowledge that's shared. And sometimes just questioning is like, well, that's how you did it. Is that really the best way to do it? Maybe we could try a different way.
Sure.
And there's room for that kind of experimentation. And the industry is continuing to evolve. So we don't always do the way we used to do it, but we certainly learn from our past. And then, of course, we have the opportunity to perform for all ages, doing a Midsummer for all ages. That's a way to kind of share the story and hopefully bring people in to get people excited about it. We also have our Willpower education tour, which goes into the classrooms. It's a fall tour that goes into middle schools and high schools. And the Lenny Fowler Willpower tour has been going on for decades, and we've served about 225,000 students in that time. Wow. Every year we do a different Shakespeare play. Last year it was an edited version of Hamlet that toured for 6 weeks. This fall it's going to be Romeo and Juliet. So it's often, we have a short list of plays that are often in the curriculum, because we also want to really encourage our young people, our students, to experience Shakespeare as it was intended to be experienced, which was as a performance, not read from the text. So many of us, the first time we experienced Shakespeare, we're sitting in a classroom, we open up Julius Caesar, and all of a sudden I have to, I'm reading the part of Mark Antony, and I'm like, I don't even know who this is. Like,
what is going on?
Saying what's going on?
And then,
right. A classmate next to me is reading something, and it just is so boring. My eyes glaze over. Like, it was never intended to. Shakespeare didn't even publish these plays in his lifetime. They were published after he died 400 years ago to this year, 1623, the first folio was published. But because, he wanted them produced. He wanted them to be live. Also, he made a lot more money when they were live produced and not somebody else was doing them. Yeah, but they were blueprints for performance. They weren't meant to be literature. So that's the way that they're authentically meant to be experienced.
With DeSales, you said you're relatively new here to the area.
Yeah.
I think there's so many people who would echo my sentiments in saying that we're so lucky to have this festival that takes place every year. Last year, I got to interview Tony Todd, who is who's one of my favorite actors, and we talked about fishing, and he was telling me the different lakes he goes to in the area when he's up here. It's just so neat that we have this going on, and it's an entire summer of it. Can you talk a little bit about what you're hoping that, whether you come to every performance or one performance or the children's show, what are you hoping that people, the audience, gets out of it this year or maybe every year?
I hope that I hope people enjoy it. I hope they have a good time. I hope that they, I want people to come. If it's for the first time, they should just come on Community Day, which is on July 1. We're going to have a bunch of community partners here. We have a lot of free events happening, as well as some performances that are ticketed. That's a great day just to come check out the festival if you've never been here before. I want people to have a good time. I want people to, one of the things about live theater, and it's the antidote for what is kind of ailing us societally right now. Our smartphones, which has been so important to us, and a huge, advancement in how we communicate, has also been the thing that has been driving us farther and farther away from each other, where we can get entertainment, we can get information, everything can just be like in our pocket and immediately in front of us. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I have every single day. I'm having a conversation with somebody, I stop talking, and then I look around and there are like 3 people just like on their phones. They're not even talking to each other, they're just in their phones. And I'm guilty of that too. Sometimes I just need to check my email or whatever. Sure. Right. When you're in a theater event, you kind of have to put all that away. You have to focus on what's happening in front of you. And then as a community, you're experiencing something together. You're laughing, you're crying, you're clapping, whatever. It's happening communally, it's happening together. And that's the kind of stuff that knits us together as a community. And then we can share that experience, and we can say, hey, George, remember that performance? Remember that thing that happened? That was awesome. Oh yeah, I totally do. And then, when you get the benefit of then actually connecting with those performers, because, they're also humans, getting to know them and just understanding how we are, we're better off when we have those kinds of shared collective experiences.
Yeah, it's so neat that you mentioned that. I don't know if you're familiar with Touchstone Theater in South Bethlehem. They just put on, they do it every year, but they had the Young Playwrights Festival, and they held it at Zollner Arts Center. And it's students write the plays, and then adults and children as well, they act them out. And it was one of the first times post-pandemic now that, we brought our daughter into a theater. We're watching this. And it was fantastic. Like, she was getting the plays because they're coming from a children's perspective. And the Zollner Arts Center was full. And this is for like a children's play production. It felt really special. And I think, people are yearning for that. I don't want to speak for everybody, but just to go to something like this is so well done and nearby. With some really, consummate professionals who put on amazing shows. It's like I said, we're lucky to have it, and we're looking forward to, experiencing it again. And here, I want to dive right into it. So if people want to get more information, I think the best spot is just to go to pashakespeare.org. But am I right in saying that it does kick off May 31st with Henry IV Part 2?
Yeah, okay. Next week, Henry IV Part 2 has the first preview performance on May 31st. Then on June 2nd, the Midsummer Night's Dream Community Tour starts, and all the dates and all the locations are also on the website. But in the first weekend, they're in Easton and Allentown and Bethlehem, and then they go all over the Lehigh Valley. So those dates and locations are there. That tour starts on June 2nd, and then in just over a week or so after that, we jump into there it all is, and then we jump into In the Heights, and we're off to the races.
And it's great if you look at this, and I'll let people go to the website and check it out on their own. But, we're going into August. There are children's shows. So a lot going on here. It's not, I talked to some of my friends about it. Like, oh, Shakespeare. I'm like, no, there's way more than what you're thinking about. And I think now as we're, out of 2020 and we're back into being able to experience this stuff, it's really exciting. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I know that we are almost out of time. One of the things when I think about Shakespeare, what I want people to think about is like revolutionary creativity, because I think that's what he did, is he just changed the game. And I think that we want to do a festival that just embraces the best in the creative theater arts. So it's not just about like looking back at some guy who wrote a lot of great stuff, but it's about how that kind of work frees us into being really creative and finding ways to connect with our community to do it. All
right. Jason King Jones, thank you so much. This has been great. I'm sorry I kept you on hold there for a minute, but I think this turned out fantastic, and we're really looking forward to it. Again, visit pashakespeare.org to get all the information, to buy your tickets for the summer season of the Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival. Jason, thank you so much, and we're looking forward to seeing you this summer.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time talking with you.
Big shout out to our sponsors, Molly's Irish Grill and Sports Pub, Michael Bernardin with Remax Realty, WXPN FM, and of course, the Wind Creek Event Center. Thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you next time.